Paul Chek. Today I'd like to talk to you about what I'm calling the sword of thinking. I'm sure most of you are aware we're in a very thinking-based culture, and thinking has been worshipped by our culture, and great thinkers are worshipped by our culture, and our academic institutions are largely built on the concept of thinking. In fact, it's interesting, when I was doing research into various learning models and principles of learning and the science of teaching, I came across Howard Gardner's work years ago and others delineating learning styles. And there's 4 classic learning styles: the visual, which is the dominant; auditory is the next largest; kinesthetic is the next smallest; and then the smallest group of learning styles is called mathematical logical, which is based on really information in written form or in chunks, little data bits. And it turns out, interestingly, that 95 to 98% of all information imparted in all academic institutions, literally from first grade all the way to doctorate programs, is presented in the mathematical logical learning style, which is a learning style that is only ideal for about 5 to 8% of human beings. So this is why we say PhD stands for piled higher and deeper, and an expert is someone who knows more and more about less and less until they know absolutely everything about nothing. And what I want to share with you today is that though thinking is very powerful, it is effectively a sword. And if we're not careful, we can think ourselves right out of what we want or need, or out of opportunities. And if we are conscious, then thinking becomes a very powerful tool. But to be a functional and powerful tool, in my experience, it must be integrated with the other 4 or the other 3 qualities of consciousness that Jung identified in his research, and many others have found that it was an accurate model of how consciousness works in a human being. So to begin with, thinking is one of the 4 functions of consciousness in a human being, and intuition, feeling, and sensation are also equally important aspects of how consciousness expresses itself through and in human beings. My topic today, with the idea of the sword of thinking, is that thoughts cut because of the way thinking works. To think about a white car, you must exclude thinking about any other color of a car. If you are thinking about your girlfriend, you must exclude all the other women in the world. So whenever you're thinking about something, you have to focus consciousness or awareness on exactly that and exclude everything else, or you would not be able to make any meaning out of it specifically. An example is, if somebody asks you, where do you live? And I say, I live at 772 Johnson Drive, Los Angeles, California, 92007, then I have actually isolated a specific location where packages can be sent and people can find me. But without that, if I was just to say I live in the United States, you would not be able to get anything to me. You would not be able to figure out where I am. So when we look at thinking, you can see almost every thought becomes some kind of an address. If you're thinking about a cat, you know that it has something to do with cats. It localizes it to cats. If you're thinking about your cat, then you've isolated one cat out of all cats. If you're saying, I'm thinking about my cat that lives here, then I can send you something for your cat at that address, and I've isolated which cat and which person and which location. Now, that's very functional and very, very useful, but if we're not careful, we can have a tendency to believe our thoughts while ignoring the information that thought needs to be connected to some degree, depending on the situation, or the, shall we say, the map is perceived to be the equivalent of the experience or the territory. And we all know from using GPS systems that all of a sudden you come to roadworks and your GPS does not know where to go, or you're going somewhere and the GPS does not have that road in it, and any number of things that lead you to finding out that there's no way to avoid exploration and being in the moment of the experience, and then you have to feel which direction you should go, or intuit which direction you should go, or intuit whether or not you're going to make it to your appointment on time, and do you need to make a phone call to let someone know you're about to be late, etc. So now let's just take a brief look at what thinking is. Thinking, as I said, dissects. Thinking labels. So I dissected by saying, this is where I live, and I gave you a label, which was a street address and a name. Thinking is a process of compartmentalizing. You have to be able to compartmentalize what you're talking about, or nobody understands you. If you're giving a lecture on mountain ranges as though they're all the same, somebody's going to immediately say, well, wait a minute, the things you're describing to that mountain range don't look anything like the mountain ranges where I live. I live in British Columbia, and you're talking about the Alps, which is a very different environment, both mountains. So thinking is used to compartmentalize things, but we have to not only compartmentalize, we have to label and dissect in order to effectively communicate. Thinking acts largely on data bits of information. When you're reading a letter to you or a book, you're really reading a series of symbols, and what we often forget is that those symbols point to something else. So if you're reading about a black cat, the black cat is not there on the paper. The black cat likes to eat raw meat is pointing to another cat, and the meat's not there. So if we use data bits of information and believe that we actually know or understand, which is the big problem of reading about God. People read about God and think they know God, but they forgot that everything they were reading is pointing not to an idea, but an experience. And because ideas themselves have to be dissected, labeled, and compartmentalized, and often suffer programmed biases, then we actually begin to worship an idea and make the mistake of thinking that the idea is actually the entity or the experience that the symbols were pointing to. And this can be depicted very easily. If someone says, I want to talk to you about God, the word about means to go around. So whenever you're talking about something, you're not making a direct connection, you're going around it. If you're talking about riding a horse, you're going around the concept of riding a horse, and all the talking about riding horse doesn't improve your horse riding until you get on a horse and take the idea into a process of sensation and feeling. In other words, you got to connect to the horse, you have to feel yourself and the horse, and you have to have some intuition about whether or not the horse might try to jump that fence over there with you or rub you off on that tree. And then thinking becomes more powerful. So one of the biggest things about thinking is that it's a bit of a sad situation. Not only are we heavily influenced and often traumatized by the mathematical logical learning model, because people that are visual learners, auditory learners, and particularly kinesthetic learners can often find themselves being labeled and judged as not being as good as their peers or being told they're stupid. But you may have a kinesthetic genius, like a Shaquille O'Neal or a Kobe Bryant, who doesn't do well with mathematical logical processing, but is very potentially kinesthetic and visual. So when we get into thinking, we have to be very careful, because we don't all process information well in bits of data in order to have the experience that is unique to us as individuals. And when we look at thinking and we look at education, we come to a bit of a sad reality. We are not taught how to think in pretty much all academic educational systems, with a few exemptions. Steiner schools, for example, teach kids how to think, not necessarily what to think. most academic educational institutions and religions teach people not how to think, but what to think. You think of God this way. You think of physics this way. You think of money management this way. So really what happens is people take on a set of instructions and become like programmed robots, and even when their robot is bashing into life and parts are flying off, they still keep repeating the same model like a programmed robot. And this goes all the way back to the fact that we are taught what to think because the people that are often behind the institutions are not there to create freedom for you. They're there to guide you either in their idea of how you should live or what you should be, and in many other potential agendas. So we're taught what to think, not how to think. And how you think as you experience what are you feeling, what are you sensing, and what is your intuition, and then thinking becomes connected to the rest of consciousness and becomes meaningful. When we're programmed into what to think, if you follow it back, we're almost always being led to a dogma. We're taught what to think in science in school, and almost all science classes, except for advanced university training that gets into quantum physics, we're taught to think that the world is basically Newtonian and that everything is matter, and if it can't be weighed or measured, then it doesn't exist. So we play a game with ourselves. For example, people with that mindset think that people that believe in angels or have mystical experiences are hallucinating or are nutty or are children or whatever. But all the while they're playing that game, they forget that the most valuable thing in their own life, and any scientist I've asked this has agreed, I ask, what is the most valuable thing in your life? What if you were to lose would be the most devastating to you? And almost all the time, everyone comes to the word love. And I ask them, is there any scientific experiment you know of that has objectified what love is? And they all say it's not possible. I say, okay, it's not possible, but you believe in it and you live in it every day and wouldn't want to be without it. Yet when people begin talking about things that science can't weigh and measure, you shun them as though there's something wrong with them or they're mentally retarded. So we have to remember that when we're in program biases such as materialism, it basically deifies ideas but does not really put any value so much on experiences. So now we want to look at what do we need to do, but what can we do when we're thinking? Well, sensation relates to the experience you're having through your five senses. If it's hot outside and sunny and you feel that your skin's getting burnt, your thought might have been, I'm going to lay on the beach all day. But you may not have realized how hot it was going to be, and you may have forgotten to get suntan lotion. So the feeling of getting burnt through sensation is likely to give you a choice. I've either got to borrow some suntan lotion, walk to a local store, buy some, or lay here and get a burn. And then you're making a choice, but the idea, I'm going to go to the beach all day without sensation, could become a burn. Then we have to look at feeling. Feeling, as Jung uses it, does not relate necessarily to feelings specifically as emotions, because there's a distinction there. It relates to the values we use to basically not only think but choose what we want to include or exclude. So not everybody is a materialist. Some people have a different philosophy because they have different values. So if you tried to sell a person like that on a deity such as Jesus or anything that is objectified but excludes others, they may not be open to that because it doesn't match their values. So your values are the things that ultimately lead you to saying yes or to saying no. If you offer me a beautiful plate of food that you picked up at a local restaurant, the first question out of my mouth is going to be, is that organic food? And if it's not, no matter what, even if it hurts your feelings, I'm going to tell you, I'm not likely to eat that today because I have organic food in the refrigerator, but I'm really grateful you brought that. Feel free to take that home and enjoy it yourself or share it with somebody else. Or we can do something else useful with it, which is called composting. We can convert it into beautiful food for the soil. But that's based on a value. So when Jung uses the term feelings, he's really referring to the underlying value, but the value comes by way of a feeling. If you see somebody abusing an animal, you are likely to have feelings about that, and the feelings are going to trigger thoughts and reactions, and you may go tell that person that you don't really appreciate what they're doing, but that would be based on your own values with regard to how animals should be treated. Now, emotions, in my opinion, and in some other people's opinions, do belong in this category because emotions are the flows of energy that basically inform us about our values. So if you have a value of loving your children, then there's going to be an emotion involved in that. But if you have the value that your children are now useless little buggers and they're eating too much food and they should be out working on their own because they're 19 and still living at home, then your value is going to result in you having a very different experience. You, instead of feeling loving and connecting, you're wanting to push them out so maybe you can love yourself better. But again, you're having feelings. If they keep staying and ignoring you, you might get angry. But again, the anger that you're experiencing as an emotion that you're feeling is really because of something to do with your value not being honored by yourself or other people. So to distinguish, feeling relates to values, but it includes the emotions that inform us as to whether or not we're coherent or incoherent with our own values and expression of those values. Okay? Intuition means to connect to or to see, to feel or to perceive that which is invisible to the eye or to the senses or cannot be gained through thinking. Intuition not only looks at what your address is, but looks at what the environment might be like, what the weather might be like there. And if my GPS breaks on the way or it can't find you, then my intuition would be accessing my inner sense of direction, like a bird migrating and just feeling, I have a feeling I should go left here. Yep. Oh, there's the road. Yes, that's the road. And now I know what address it is. So intuition is something that connects the parts together for us, but isn't a consciously directed process like thinking. It's more being clear on what your intention is and then opening yourself like a sponge, drawing in the universe's reaction to your question. So what we want to conclude with then is that ideas are largely what is produced by thinking. We make maps in our head that are passed on to us, largely by others telling us what to think, not how to think. And we often run into trouble because thinking that negates experience produces maps that clash with territory in relationships with self, others, and the world. And that in order for thinking, which is like a sword, to be effective, we want to make sure that we don't cut out the rest of our conscious capacity through the use of intuition, feeling, and sensation. And that way we can engage life much more fully, and we're less likely to create what we don't want because we're more comprehensive in managing the flow of energy that must be experienced through these four quadrants of consciousness, if you will. Now, Jung made a very important statement, which I think is worth mentioning here. He said intellectualism is a common cover-up for fear of direct experience. So intellectuals are often people who don't have training in the use of their intuition, who are confused about their values or haven't looked into effectively the long-range effect of living those values out, and who often are so up in their heads that they're numb to their bodies and therefore don't actually get a sensation of what they're doing by applying ideas. For example, the idea of vaccinating children. Well, it sounds real good, but when you start looking at the experience that children are having with vaccinations, it's producing more problems than the vaccinations were intended to help. So there's what happens when thinking is separated from sensation and has confused values and does not use its intuition. And there's, a million examples of this. So we want to know that to really think effectively requires that we engage enough with the material we're working with to have an experience of the process that it's related to the degree that we can do that. For example, does the idea work in relationship? You can read books all about how to give somebody an orgasm, but you might find that all those techniques are very off-putting to them. And if you're not willing to use your thinking in the moment, in the present, to connect to that individual and find out what is nourishing, exciting, and fulfilling to them, then your thinking becomes ineffective. So we want to make sure that we marry the thinking process with the experiences coming by way of sensation and feeling. If we're using our intuition, we could be in an experience, but we're usually trying to get a clear idea of what we should do next or where we should go next. So intuition, though it can be part of the experience, is really usually to help us get better ideas or understand the connection between ideas. Now, for those of you that want more help and get a deeper understanding of these kinds of processes and concepts, my holistic lifestyle coaching program level 1, 2, and 3 progressively take you into a deeper and deeper understanding of these concepts and many others. My new Chek 4-quadrant coaching mastery program, which will be available online when we get it finished, and is now available in the United Kingdom at a given time this month, which depending on when you see this blog may already have passed. But if you go to the Chek Institute website, chekinstitute.com, you can find out in the schedule where the Chek 4-quadrant coaching mastery program will be run live in San Diego, which I believe is September this year in San Diego. PPS Success Mastery Lesson 2 is called Self-Management. I show how the basic science of brainwashing and mind programming works, how it's been used on you, and give you techniques for, shall we say, cleaning your own mind and nervous system of the viruses of mind that no longer serve your dream and your self-concept, so you can restructure your own mental approach to life and your emotional approach to life by rewiring yourself and reprogramming yourself so that your experience of yourself and your relationships are dream affirmative. It's a very powerful lesson, and it goes quite deep. It takes you through some shocking experiences where you realize, for example, just how dangerous some religious teachings can be. The 1, 2, 3, 4 for overcoming addiction, obesity, and disease is, I think, 9 hours of audio and a 130-something page workbook that gives you a formula for applying these kinds of concepts to healing yourself. And the last 4 doctors you'll ever need, How to Get Healthy Now ebook, gives you a really good education in values, so establishing your values. PPS Success Mastery Lesson 1 also goes quite heavy into establishing dream affirmative values and helping you find out what your dream is. So thanks for joining me today. Remember, thinking is a sword. It can be useful, but it can be dangerous. And look very carefully at your thoughts, because most of us have been taught what to think, but in order to enhance our life and our relationships, we need to learn how to think, which requires the use of intuition, feeling, and sensation. I'll see you soon. Hope you enjoy applying this information.